Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the latest SASIG webinar. We're looking forward to forward thinking with data intelligence, the hidden power of data. Without much further ado, Peter, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Jez and Tarquin, and appreciate everyone's time this morning. What I wanted to talk about really, and the subject matter here is the hidden power of data. And I appreciate the audience is a security-focused audience, but my passion really lies in the data, and I wanted to just take us all on a bit of a journey as to where I see some of the challenges, opportunities, where I see that going, and perhaps share as a small community some of that opportunity and what it looks like and some use cases around it. I've spent the last 20 years in the industry and latterly been very fortunate to be involved in some major cloud adoption programs. So this presentation comes with a slant on cloud, clearly recognizing that data isn't just there, but you will see that as I walk through it. But it's really born out of my passion for data itself. And that started really, and I'll make it personal. I talk to my 17-year-old son about data quite frequently. He's at a junction in his life going, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, Dad. And I said, well, have you thought about being a data engineer? He says, I've no idea what that is. Okay. I said, well, if you understand, he has a passion for Formula One. I said, well, it's all driven by data. Partly the success of the engineering capability, and I'm an engineer by background, is now driven by the power of data, and a lot of work and effort goes into that. Equally, if you want to be a farmer, you better start to understand data and climate. So actually, for his generation, which he is the Xbox generation, he's driven really by a lot of that data. And I think that's really something that sparked my passion for looking into what this platform is. And talking to a few people, we're right at the beginning of this generation of what data can do and the hidden power of data. So the story this morning is about that and just looking at some of the challenges and opportunities. But of course, no presentation is complete without a few quotes to kick us off. So, I was looking around really, and, there are a few quotes that resonated with me, particularly around this area of data. And Geoffrey Moore's famous for saying, without data, you're blind and deaf in the middle of a freeway. And that really gets that sense of there's a lot out there, how are we going to manage it? There's a quote by W. Edwards talks about, in God we trust, all others bring data, which made me smile. I think there's a real volume to this. And I think that one of my favorites is data that is love tends to survive. And this is really some of the theme of the presentation over the next 20, 30 minutes is about that. What is the data and where is it? And that was a quote by Kurt Bolliker. And that's all about, data will outlive our generation. And I'm going to take this presentation, not just, here and now, but actually try and provoke some thought amongst our community about where it's going, the journey we're going on. So my quote really is data is a journey and not a destination. And really that's the theme behind what we're going to try and look at today. Now, I find myself asking this very frequently, who owns the data? And it's something when we're exploring the value, where it sits, what outcomes can be achieved, be they intentional outcomes, unintentional outcomes. And I talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. We explore the value, what that's going to mean to us now and in future and where that sits. Governance and control and compliance, and that sort of does roll into our responsibilities within security. I'm not from a security background, but I'm very well aware, working in this sector, that has a big role to play in this. And then the principles of the framework for the future, what are we building towards? So, that's the key thread of what we're going to look at, this ownership, the management and the protection and care around the data. But I'll start off with some well-proven facts. These are out there for everybody to see, but I think it is well worth just revisiting some of these, because it is changing so quickly. There are loads of facts around. You can spend hours on Google, and I have, and that just contributes towards the generation of more data. So, 500 million tweets a day. I put that because actually data is being generated by many different ways and ways of behavior today. The 4 terabytes of connected car data per day is a subject we'll dig into a little bit because it sort of provokes some thinking around that space. So we'll cover that in subsequent slides. I think I talk about email a lot because myself, you can tell from where I am, I come from the email generation. We're still reliant on email, be that personal emails, business emails, social emails. There's still a lot of data. And then you think about the reply to all, the forward, the content. It's generating tons and tons of data for us. So we're getting this idea that it's moving, but there's different ways now. So, the WhatsApp message or Facebook, and we'll talk more about Facebook because it sort of bridges that personal gap and that business gap as well. The amount of data, 4 petabytes of data being generated by Facebook every day is an enormous amount of data to be consumed. So we're getting, again, this idea that it's building up. But the point I wanted to make really is that it's from very wide and varied sources, be that mobile or connected devices, and where it's going. And it's going so fast. This idea that even a couple of years ago, more than 90% of the data is generated in the last 24 months. And this isn't slowing down. So this little stat at the bottom, 2.5 quintillion bytes, an exabyte. I've been on a journey myself of how many exabytes make up a zettabyte. And, it's very fascinating, but it does sort of try and bring it back to reality. And, if you talk about 1,000 exabytes, being, a million petabytes, it's quite contextual these days. It's not unreasonable to be talking about those sizes of data. And if we look at where the forecast lies in terms of zettabytes going forward, it's an enormous amount. 1 zettabyte, I Googled this as well, is 660 billion Blu-ray discs. I thought, okay, that puts it into context for me because I've got a few Blu-ray discs. You can tell again, really, I've not completely streamed to the 145 million hours of Netflix streaming. But, that kind of information generated, on a daily basis, it equates to, 330 million hard storage devices, the biggest hard storage devices that we can find every day. Okay, so this is going somewhere. This data is going somewhere and it's living somewhere. So, that's sort of setting up the background to where it's going. So 2 key thoughts that leads me on to is, well, why is that so important? So there's this sort of this all going on, but then I find myself, and this is of course a personal opinion that I'm sharing with you, and my passion for data is, that transparency and where is that data? Where's it sitting, and how are we using that data? So, it's that really that starts to spark my interest in how can we make more of this? And it isn't a fear factor. I come at this, now thinking it's a great opportunity, but how can we open this up? So again, just bamboozle with some more numbers for your note taking or whatever. But, Facebook alone, it's got 2.94 billion users. Okay. And what surprised me is there's 2 billion users every day. So they've got a really high uptake here. And this is, spanning our personal worlds and what happens with it. And of course, we all know that Facebook is generating income and demand from us, the people that consume that service. And, again, in all transparency, I don't use Facebook. But I think that will become clear as I go into more of the presentation. But that is a fact. So we're generating lots of information, and generating revenues of almost 30 billion a quarter. That's almost $10 per user, okay, that they're generating on a quarterly basis. So really, it's a vehicle, yes, for information and sharing, but the product in ourselves is generating vast amounts of new income. And again, Facebook's not that old. Okay, there are 200 million companies using Facebook pages in order to target and generate business. With 98% of Facebook users being on mobile devices, the whole world's changed. And that starts to think about, okay, where is all this going? And the bit I loved about this, they're generating 4 petabytes of data a day, which is almost 0.5% of all the data we generate every day is Facebook, which stopped me and went, wow, that's quite a lot, actually. Even 0.5% contributes to a lot on a daily basis. So that's got to go somewhere. And again, I discovered that this is all stored in a place called the Hive, which made me smile a little bit again. It's like we're keeping stuff for the future here. And this is, again, just touching back onto the theme, and my passion is we're creating something for the future here. This data that we have and where we keep it and where we store it is not just about here and now, it's about the future. And this idea that there's a hive behind Facebook is we're storing this somewhere. We're doing it for some good. Now, I think that's also shrouded in secrecy and privacy because, of course, security and privacy plays a big role in this. So if you look at people like Apple, just a few years ago, they built this huge data center out in Arizona. It's 1.3 million square foot data center. They won't reveal what it is and what it's for under privacy and secrecy. Now, we trust them because they're keeping our fingerprints in our faces for all the services that we consume through Apple. But there is something in that. This facility's almost the same size as the biggest Amazon distribution warehouse, which is over in Texas. So there's a lot of information in there. And I just don't know what care, what protection, who looks after that, and what's happening to it. So there's a degree of transparency that I would enjoy more if we could understand how we build on opportunities. So we went through a whole generation of creating this information. Now I'm starting to test where it's kept. And that does lead into, of course, we've got some governance around this, and we'll touch upon the policies in a second. But, because we're generating more and more of this, it's really, do we know where it is and who's looking after it? So the big tech companies, of course, have a lot of this data, be that Amazon, Facebook, or whatever. These are huge tech companies. So Forbes Research, looked into this, and on average, 66% of people polled didn't really trust the tech companies to hold that much personal information. They weren't sure what that was. So that's a vast majority of people. And they did it by country, interestingly. And I looked across this as well. And the most trusting country, and I think something like 55% of the people polled in Norway trusted the tech companies. And the least trusting was, of course, the UK, where we're up at the sort of 70% of the people polled in the UK didn't trust the big tech companies, and believed held too much information and too much control over our own personal data. So this sort of led into this theme that we're actually a little bit concerned, and it's a confidence and trust issue. So in order to unblock this potential that we're going to explore, we have to overcome some of the challenges about our confidence and trust in this. How do we embrace that opportunity? And I'll touch upon that again in a second, really. Now, there is the opposite, which we just turn it all off and no one's got access to it. So that'd be pretty secure, but that's just not practical and not going to work for us. So we sort of go into this, do we opt in? Do we opt out? How does that all work? And we'll explore some ideas around that. But of course, it wouldn't be right without touching on some of the principles that guide us today. So be that GDPR, well practiced, well understood, certainly in the UK and Europe. CCPA, now out in California, they took the brave step in August last year to introduce, governance with penalties. So that's starting to bite. But these are sort of guidelines, and they're, I believe, great building blocks. But I don't think it solves all of the problem. And why I say that is we're trying to open up this data. And so there was a movement back in 2018, which I was part of, around open banking. And I've done a fair bit of work with challenger banks, and speaking to one of the bigger challenger banks in the UK. They sort of talk about open banking as how do we promote SMB businesses, how do we promote customer information to be more open? And speaking to their COO, there's a real reluctance personally in people to have that open. And you sort of go, well, I understand that. Open banking gives the right to other organizations to approach banks and have an API into the information with an opt-in. Do I really want my personal information, my pension, my income, my savings being sent to SMEs or other organizations across across participants of this open banking? Probably not, because I don't really know to what level that's going. So there's a very, very little uptake in the open banking API at the moment. And this is, again, how are we getting over this? What's going to happen, and exploring the concept of how we control it. That takes us down another avenue, which you'll be relieved to know I'm not going to do today. But this idea that blockchain becomes the decentralization of privacy and identity. Do we start to use different kind of technology to be able to protect us from that? That's a whole webinar, a whole separate subject of discussion. So I'm not going to talk about that today, but it does start to lend itself in how do we build confidence? How do we move forward and start to do that? So, I think that the legislation does exist. It is important, but it's somewhat of a barrier in my mind, to help us unlock some of this potential. So we get to a place we're saying, yeah, okay, how do we move this forward now? I sort of talked about lots of data. We all know that. Tried to put some context around that. Personal views on, the governance and where they sit and the standards of governance and how that works. So we've got billions of sources of data being generated every day. We're not trusting organizations that hold it. They've done a survey to prove that. And we're not really embracing the new open standards. So how do we move this all forward? How do we get into, business change? How do we accelerate this and try and unlock it? How do we unlock some of this potential? And what do we do with it? So, going back to that point that we're just at the beginning of this journey, we're generating lots of data. We all know that. But how do we use it to benefit situations that we find ourselves in today? So I'm going to look at a couple of use cases that just help us understand perhaps some of the challenges, but also some of the opportunities. So one of my passions, again, around connected cars. So connected cars is, again, understood. We all have, understand what a modern connected car looks like. And I'm not talking about, driverless cars here. I'm talking about our general everyday use cars that are now increasingly becoming connected. So the first challenge that I came across, and I was involved in a debate in this probably a couple of years ago, really, is who owns that data. So if you look at the center of this, the car is generating that data. The vehicle manufacturer is building services into our vehicles today that allows that manufacturer to understand mean time failure between parts. It allows them to understand driver behavior. To the extent we even talked about customization of tires. I had a conversation with a tire manufacturer saying the future of tire manufacturing lies with your driving style. What they'll do is it'll be a subscription service. We'll look at your driving style, where you drive, how you drive. You will buy a personalized tire that will be manufactured for your driving style, and then you subscribe to it. So that takes the whole meaning of where's this data to another level. But if we look at the practicalities of it, it's all locked in one place. And the simple challenge came when we were talking about dealerships and maintenance of vehicles versus the manufacturer of the vehicles. And there was a big fallout saying the manufacturer said, no, we own that data. Well, no, the customer owns that data, actually. You opt in. Now, I think we're all used to signing tick boxes on our journeys going, yes, I opt in to have my information used by other providers. However, when we're buying vehicles and we're understanding, we're ticking, yes, I'll have a satellite navigation system installed in that. Yes, I want remote diagnostics done on my car. We're actually agreeing to have all of our data collected in another repository. Now, the manufacturer is like, that's our data. We're collecting that for the use of our, manufacturing system. And then the supply chain, which could involve dealerships or maintenance vehicles, said, no, that's our data because it's our customer. They bought the car from us. And we want to know about maintenance schedules. Then it gets into actually, we want to have that information available to other parties. Tesla have done some great case studies on this, where they're now opening, the vehicle is just an endpoint. And now they're able to open up those avenues of opportunity to explore it. I was telling a story to someone the other day with this open platform. You can now drive your car to a location. You can connect to other Tesla devices in that location to look for parking spaces. Okay, that's an open platform. You have that, but you have to sign up to be connected. And I go back to, I start to push on this a little bit myself because I test myself. Is this a generational thing? Because I'm like, I don't want people to know where I'm parked. And I'm, well, why? They've got cameras around them. If I want to share that data with other drivers that helps your journey, then why wouldn't I want to share that? It's a bit like store cards or opt-in. Again, referring back to my 17-year-old and that generation, they're like, why wouldn't you want those services? Because you can opt in or opt out at any time. So actually overcoming that trust will help us explore the opportunities further. Now, you can push this even further and say, actually, the vehicle itself is only one step in this journey. So I was exploring this with a guy at Paragon. Now, Paragon, if you don't know them, a customer of ours, their heartland is in printing. But the guy was telling me he has a pocket full of everything they print. They print all of the train tickets in the UK. So if you have a train ticket with a barcode on the back or a little magnetic strip, they print them all, 100% of them. So he has an idea that says, actually, one day if we could have this data that's out there, that actually what we have is that ticket becomes a journey experience rather than a ticket. So you buy the experience. His example being, you buy a ticket from Brighton to London. It taps in and says, actually, the weather forecast in London at the moment is not looking too great. The Victoria line's down. We're going to struggle. What I'm going to do is I'm going to flag an Uber car for you, give you the option to have an Uber waiting for you outside the facility to pick you up and take you to a destination. Do you want to opt in or opt out now? You've got 5 minutes to make that decision. And that becomes an entire journey experience. So from buying a ticket, but that requires all of these repositories to be connected together. And that's my vision of all of this, really. When we start to connect these things together, then we can start to piece together better experiences, be that personal in this instance, or as we look at the next one, be that something a little bit more, you know, with a better global agenda around sustainability. So one of the projects that I've fortunately been involved in, I talked about, you know, my experience with cloud is around this use case. So you can look at this. This is a UK use case, and Microsoft and the Met Office combined, you know, on a huge project to shift away from the Met Office really guiding their own destiny in terms of the technology they use and the data that they have. So they embarked on a whole project to, you know, look at the next platform for the next generation, where simply the Met Office want to be, you know, a role player as we move towards net zero, you know, in humanity, and create sustainability as an agenda and create that data information to open to all. So what they did is they looked at their current compute capacity that they have down in Exeter, and they decided this was better served with cloud capability. So they've moved all of their data into the cloud. Now, to put that into context again, we were talking about right at the beginning of this, in the whole exabyte and how that turns into, you know, the number of the number of zettabytes. You know, so exabytes are pretty significant, and you know, the data itself that the Met Office hold today is only around 4 exabytes of data. But in order to transfer that, you know, they installed 4 dedicated express routes between Exeter and the new destination, and it took 18 months just to migrate the data. Okay, so there's a really big sort of idea that we need to collect data, and now they're generating more and more data. So this comes from a number of avenues. So what the Met Office have decided to do, they do 2 things. Okay, they said, we forecast. So we're going to try and increase the resilience and the accuracy of forecasting. That's our job. And that forecast, of course, goes out to government bodies, airports, airlines, as well as the weather that we see every day. Equally, on the other side, they're a force to be reckoned with in climate change and climate research. And that's the force that they really want to open up. So they have inputs and outputs. So they've expanded their input mechanism. Now they have social weather stations. You can now have your own weather station in your back garden. That data gets fed in to the Met Office for future research. Now it goes back to this idea that I'm not sure I have the mindset or the intelligence to explore all of that information, let alone the historical information that's being collected and the future information. So what the Met Office are adopting now is this: can we start to create something to build on in the future? Because we don't know the possibilities. You can apply this to science, you can apply this to as we're doing in this situation, you know, climate change, you know, you can apply this to finance and business models. So the idea that this data is something we have to do today starts to shift for me into what are we going to do to create excellence for tomorrow? You know, we've got quite a few things going on. And I think that this is something that I'm starting to increasingly think about, is how can we protect the future? What do we do? And how do we move that forward? So it starts to lead on to others. And this is where something where the Met Office have said, okay, let's change the way we work and see if we can do that. And that's a partnership opportunity. Now, that's something the UK government invested in. It's a £1.2 billion project. So again, there's technology involved, there's people involved, it's creating future, it's creating information. So I see this as a great thing. And this is where it shifts from, yes, we're generating loads of data, I'm not scared about it, to an opportunity. And you can talk about anonymization, you can talk about the protection of data, but now what the Met Office are doing alongside Microsoft is saying, we will try and connect this data for future benefit. So that's another interesting use case. Now, in terms of use cases, I wanted to just talk about this as a final thought. Right at the beginning, I talked about, data being collected intentionally, unintentional outcomes. And I wanted to touch on this. I said, I mentioned before, I've done quite a bit of work with challenger banks. And Uber, we all know and love, or maybe not, they have unintended business outcomes. So Uber started off, as we know, just a facilitation between a buyer and a seller. So we have a service that we provide, and they act as the intermediary between the service provider and the customer, as do Amazon, as do lots of other people. So this created a business opportunity. But in order to facilitate that, they had to create this cashless payment system, because otherwise the introduction facility wouldn't work on their behalf. So they created this payments function inside the Uber application. So very quickly that's translated into people using that needed to create accounts, actually. So they needed an account in order to be able to transact this information. So as well as transacting the information, they created an account information for the providers of the service. That quickly developed into, as they expanded, providers, as we all know, they have no assets. So, okay, so they needed to provide assets to their service providers, which are vehicles. So they created a loan system whereby the providers of the service could facilitate the loans through Uber. So very quickly, they had a payments engine, they had an account system, and they had a loans function. So they became a bank. They didn't start off to be a bank, but the outcome was they became a bank. And that sort of then expanded into, we can now provide insurance policies. So this idea became that the data fed the outcome that becomes a challenger bank, but it becomes a bank in the context that I belong to Uber community. So it's a community type bank where I can now have preferential rates for insurance, for maintenance, for introductions, whatever. That creates this community banking. So the big banks see this as an unintentional competition. Now, what's interesting about this is that it has an Uber recognized this just in January of this year. It's gone now to GoBank. So they created an account and it's all been given over to GoBank. So Bank of Uber, and they had an account, you had a credit account facility has now been launched as GoBank, and it's part of that GoBank facility. So they built on this, and you can see how this wasn't their core business. They've decided to go in a different direction. But when we look for challenges in our communities, they're often going to come from other places. So this is, again, an example of, okay, it started off in one area, but with the use of data and how we move through that, this generated an input in there. So that was an interesting use case of, unintentional. Now, we then move forward. I've talked about this a couple of times, really. We move forward into, well, what are we doing? What's that next generation? And I talk about, what are we leaving behind and what are we going to do with this? And this is where I start to talk about, legacy is often a terminology that's associated with technical debt and a bad thing. And actually legacy in this instance for me is a great thing. Because legacy is something we're creating for future generations. Our legacy in our generation of this data journey that we're on, there's a long, long way to go. And if we take care and create a platform where we can explore opportunities and we have a trusted platform, this has, far-reaching good implications for the way we work. Now, one of those challenges, and I go back to my engineering roots here, is, well, that's okay, Peter, right? But you're talking about how long is the data going to last? So if you look at magnetic media, of course, it goes off, it degrades. So I've been fascinated again with some technology, particularly around glass storage. So they're talking about, if you again look into Project Silica, it's about how can we really store more and more information. If we can store this information on glass, and this was a joint venture between Microsoft and Southampton University, where they've been exploring how can you use glass to store data, and that turns data into sort of 10s, 20s, 30s of years on magnetic media into hundreds of thousands of years stored in glass technology. So they're shifting away from this, and there's some great engineering problems. And if you get 5 minutes, look at Project Silica. There's some great videos about how they've solved some of the basic engineering problems, which we're creating by this amount of data that we're generating. So it's again an interesting topic of how we combine the capacity that we need in order to create this good legacy versus the engineering capability to deliver it. And of course, that pushes on our agenda around sustainability again, because we're powering these big plants that are storing all this data. So how do we offset that too? So it's generating lots of conversations, but it's a fascinating part of how do we move all this forward, and what role do we play in that? And that's I suppose the question when I was thinking about this webinar was, where do we all leave ourselves here? What do we think about this? We're creating this data. We create it every day and what we do, but this data becomes our future. So what's our ambition for it? How do we enrich it? What are the possibilities? And if we think about those possibilities, how do we, create an environment where that can grow? And it's not all about monetization. I really moved away from, yes, Facebook are generating lots of income through the data that they have on us. But in reality, if we're going to find research possibilities in medical research, in climate change, we need to observe and take care of this data going forward. And that's where it becomes our future. So, my big ambition for all of this is, what can we do and can we make a difference? We talk about human values, and, I think in this day and age, we understand it's a complicated world we live in. But I'd really love for future generations to look back at this generation, this early tech generation in the data journey, and go, yeah, they didn't get a lot of things right, but they got this bit right. And I think, for me, I am, you look at my house, I'm a bit of a hoarder. Okay, I do keep things, I don't throw things away easily, but that's part of, let's be careful before we disregard this, because there's a lot of information we don't need. There's a lot of things we don't need and we don't understand. But I think there's also a possibility to say, we don't know what those possibilities are. So, what do we do about that? And that sort of just leads me to think about, we've created this for good. Okay, we've created it, but can it continue? Can we continue to do this? And what do we need to do to change this as a community? So from a security lens, clearly protection, governance is vital to that, but also unlocking the potential of that data that we talked about and what comes out. So that's where I wanted to leave you today, just leave you with that thought about, can we continue and can we go forward?
Wow.
Back to you, Jez.
Yeah, thanks for that, Peter. I think my brain is still spinning and being a person of a certain age, quite slowly. Yeah, I mean, I thought I knew a bit about data. Clearly, I've only been scratching the surface. It is what you've just, I mean, you certainly opened my eyes a lot, and there's a lot to think about. From a personal point of view, my biggest issue is, of course, trust. I don't trust Facebook with a paper bag, let alone all the stuff they've got, and of course that's replicated anywhere else. But this is for the audience now. Please come on, guys. That was really thought-provoking. Let's throw some questions out there, and yes, let's use the experts that we've got in front of us. So I'm just going to the chat. Right, okay, so a question that was thrown out by Sasik, a question for you all: how important is data of today for future generations? And James has come back. I think it depends on the quality of curation. Even on a personal level, unless I curate the thousands of automatically backed up photos I've taken, they probably won't have a legacy for my kids. They won't have time to get the value out of it. I mean, Peter, what can you add to that?
Yeah, well, that sort of touches on this: how long is it going to last? And earlier, I was having, in preparation, I was talking to people as well, is what happens when I'm not there? If the data belongs to me, I haven't invented, a life-saving drug yet. That means I'm not going to pass away. So what's going to happen when I pass away? Where's that data going to be? How are we going to unlock it? It asks more questions, Jez, than it answers. Okay, but I get that we have to fix this, because the use of that data, we talked a little bit about different storage devices and the engineering problems that fix there. But it opens up a whole cornucopia of new conversations going, you're right, I don't know what the answer is.
And off the back of that, though, I mean, it's not for me to suggest to SASIG what sessions they run in the future, but I think you've opened up such a can of worms, might be the wrong phrase, but you've opened up so many other questions that we need to revisit this, because I think people are going to need a chance to digest what you've given us to then, I mean, me certainly, I probably have got some really good questions, but you won't get them today. I need to think about this and come back to it. But no, come on, people, there's no more questions coming in.
Well, I think, there's a comment in here about
something.
There's a comment in here about, is it the currency of future generations? And there is that, there is, again, some famous quotes around it's the oil of the future. And there is something in that. I just think, again, until we understand the governance and trust and policies around it, we don't know how to tap into it. And I think that's something, again, to be explored around how can we start to push the boundaries. And for me, it is about that democratization of who owns it. Because we've got this idea that, yes, personal data is personal data, but there's so much data that isn't personal data, like weather, for example, and you can't connect it to a person. So it's this idea, and there was a stat as well which blew my mind, is there's more stored in the cloud than the cloud generates these days. So what people are doing is putting stuff into the cloud as well as the cloud generating it, and that's the thing that's thinking, okay, how do we now manage and control and access and get to that? So, short-term wise, there's some fascinating projects. I've been lucky to be involved in energy projects, sustainability projects, that are using this connected data. And I think that then we can come into data engineering, which you sort of can contextualize. Where I then go is, okay, I probably, again, I was using this story earlier, the data journey, someone likened it to the film journey. So if you liken where we are on the data journey, we're barely out of, we're not even into talkie movies yet. Okay, we're in black and white, we're in Charlie Chaplin era. Okay, we can't conceive where this is going. Okay, but what we can do is just work with what we've got.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you say, we are, where is this going to go? I mean, what are our kids going to think? And what are our grandkids going to look back on? And it's, that exponential increase in all of this is amazing. I mean, for me to take it back to where I do feel comfortable, because I come from a law enforcement background. So, back when I started policing, it was all in black and white. And that I got into sort of covert policing, into intel policing. And the reason I'm going there is, first of all, in sort of the idea of, hang on a minute, when does information become intelligence? I know I'm perhaps going slightly off piece. So when does information become intelligence? And there might be different definitions of that depending on where you work. And also, because of the tools I had at my disposal, we, on occasions, lawfully and proportionately, were able to collect an awful lot of information on a criminal or criminals. And then it was, well, hang on a minute, what are we actually going to do with this? There is no point, and also, perhaps forgetting the legalities around it, but also the ethical thing about it. There's no point collecting information that we're never going to do anything with, because that, and then taking that into where you're going with it, your suggestions are, we're going to, unless we get a real grip on an understanding of what we're creating both personally and in the business world, we're going to make this 10 times worse for ourselves, because there's going to be a load of tosh that is just, we've always saved that. We've always, on all of that stuff. And that's again, and because a lot of our time we're going out, I mean, not so much, but certainly when we go out to the business world and provide our awareness trainings, and a lot of it is aimed at people in their personal lives, because that's where you get the buy-in. People, bless them, because no one's ever told them. They haven't got a clue what's being collated on their behalf, corrected, shared, and all the rest, before we get into data breaches and all the other nasty stuff.
Yeah.
And we've got to somehow ramp up that speed of people's personal understanding of, this is getting collected about you. There might be something you can do about it, but also, if it is getting collected about you, is it going to be of any use to you or anybody else in the future? Which feeds straight back in. But I can see Tarquin's come back on, so I think that's a bit of a heads up for me to be quiet.
No, not really, Jez. I was just thinking, it's really interesting. You talked about, when does information become intelligence? And I always thought it was something about contextualization of information, and the fact that it is particularly targeted towards a particular objective. So maybe it's just another evolution of data. You have the raw product of data, you then transform it into information, and then eventually it becomes intelligence as it assists a mission, I guess, is probably one crude way of putting it. I don't know if Peter's got a view on that. But the other thing, Peter, one question I've got as well is, I mean, we talk about the new oil and all that kind of stuff, but but data can be infinite, potentially, because we're accruing it at a massive rate. But the question I've got is about storage, because that's expensive, and there's a finite amount of that we can store, as opposed to that we can generate. Is that me being naive, or is that a problem for the future as well?
Well, it is a problem, and I go back to my engineering problems. If you look at Project Silica, that's about how we can store it for longer, which, to your point, is true, because yes, we can store it for longer, there'll just be more of it. Okay, so we unintentionally creating another problem here, but it's cold storage then. So it's very low cost, very low footprint in terms of its carbon footprint. And there are projects and engineering projects to look at that. There isn't an infinite amount, you're right. But I think it's our generation, again, we can say, oh, okay, I can see capacity to be able to do that. And that's about as far as my brain will allow me to take. But I think back to your other point, there's another great saying I didn't use around the data and information. You can have data without information, but you can't have information without data. And therefore you can't have intelligence without information, without data. And that whole artificial intelligence and where that's taking us is actually, and I'm still very in the basement here of, let's look at the data. Before you get into information, before you get into intelligence, I think we've got something to really work hard on as a community to say, what are we going to do with this data to make sure physically we've got things, and we are doing something that creates a structure and a format that allows us to explore the opportunities. Because I think I personally, I'm still strapped up in governance. I don't want people to have it. In fact, if I can opt out, I will. Given the chance, I'll opt out. And I think that's something that will change in the future generations as well. But I didn't answer your question, but yes, you're right. Physically, there has to be something. But I think, again, whether you apply Moore's law, it does run out at some point. But, you know, there is capacity to do that. And again, that's only, my brain can only take us that far at the moment.
I think we're all struggling with it because conceptually it's something we're not very used to. And it's quite abstract as well, which is a struggle for the human to get their head around the abstract. But the fact is that data impinges on, or should I say, the concept of data impacts upon all sorts of areas that affect our lives, and generations have different attitudes to that data and how important it is, and it's a currency as well.
And it's why it's fascinating for me. It actually bridges that generation gap. I've got something to talk to my 15-year-old about, or 17-year-old about, and go, actually, this is relative now. We both care about this. I come from a very different place, but it does bridge that generation gap. But you're right, it's set to change quite significantly and quite quickly.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. And of course, the value of data in actually tackling some of the big challenges we have as societies. Sorry about that. I'll kill my phone now. That we have as societies, data will be absolutely critical in doing that. Going forward.
And that's that's where I sort of you can get tied up in the financial benefits and the worry. But at the end of the day, if we can use this to solve climate change problems, and if we can use this to create, better health environments, then that's really the good outcome, the legacy that we will create for future benefit. That's why I see some excitement.
And I'm totally with you on the end game. I still think from the naivety of the general public, because again, as we all know, we're all running backwards now, aren't we? Cybersecurity is, oh my God, we've created this beast and it's a nightmare for everybody. We need to do something about it. So we're all running backwards. Yeah. And I get the completely positive sort of goals for this, but we are so far behind. The general public is so far behind to want to understand how they buy in and what that means, and the potential pitfalls and positives. And people are just, they see, it's old hat now, but they like Cambridge Analytica, those that care and those that picked up on it, and that tarnishes them. And they think, well, why the hell am I going to opt into this? I don't trust them with that. I don't trust them with that. I don't want people knowing what the weather is in my back garden, because that somehow might be used against me by big tech, because it'll add to an algorithm and all of a sudden it'll mean this, this, and this. And we have got a big marketing, or you have got, as industry, have got a big marketing job ahead of you, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that's true. And maybe there's some independence here as well. I think it becomes, if it's left to the tech companies, I think it'll become a bit divisive. I think there needs to be some independence around this mission somehow.
Yeah. See, there's a question from Mick. I don't know, Mick Kerner. I'm happy to read it out, Jez. I don't want to take your role away from you, but I just saw it pop out a few minutes ago. And Mick makes the point of there are similarities with previous storage uses we used to keep piles of paperwork. Sometimes we would cull this and keep only recent records, and other times we would retain all the piles. I know that because I've got loads of piles of paper in our house, and our dependents would throw it all away when we died. I mean, there's a load of stuff I know from dealing with dead relatives that comes on that, so I completely agree. But the question that Mick asks at the bottom is, the difference is that all this data was in their houses. The issue now is, how will we know where that data is, and will we have the access to cull it? I'm thinking of Facebook in particular.
Yeah. We were talking about this before, and unfortunately, even LinkedIn. I granted it was a couple of years ago. Unfortunate case. A colleague passed away. We tried to get them removed from LinkedIn. We couldn't do it. No. And it's just, you just think, what? That's crazy. But you can't do it. And then you have to go, no, it has to be one of the relatives. So I'm not going to go back to the relative for a business thing. So by the way, while you're there dealing with can you just sort this out over here? I mean, it's just, we have to fix this. You're right. And I think that's true. And yes, we did throw it away. But again, that power of data, some people would like that back. you know, when you're doing your genealogy research, wouldn't it be nice to go through your grandparents' loft? You know, but we can't.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's benefits and to be had with this data side too, but it comes back to trust and governance. I totally agree.
Yeah. Right. Okay. There's a comment from Sasik here. I think they're sort of beginning to sort of shut us down, but no, come on. I mean, we're 3 minutes to 12. Let's and you've all had the feedback pop up on the screen, so please do that. But yeah, if there's anything else that you want to ask whilst you're here, please do, because it'd be a missed opportunity otherwise.
They've
all gone quiet on us. Yeah, there were some good questions, and again, hopefully, I'm not alone with the fact that my head's still spinning. Thanks, Peter.
Well, I know, and it was always going to be thought provoking. When I was doing this, I thought there's no conclusion to this. I'm just going to have to go with it. So yeah, I think this is.
Yeah,
but those. Sorry,
Jess, I was just going to say, I think this is an issue that's going to grow and grow and grow. I was looking, I mean, my latest bet noir is about VPNs and the amount of data that they take from individuals without their knowledge and then sell on. So I think there's an issue about education, as you said, Jez, earlier, of the public to understand, you know, what are the costs of some of these technologies that we're being encouraged in some ways to take on.
Yeah. But, yeah, no, without a doubt, and some of the stuff we throw out in our presentations to people is, yeah, you can, you know, a lot of these tools that you need for cybersecurity, there's lots of free options out there, but why are they free? For, you know, and then, you know, well, I know we're then encouraging people to spend money, and times are hard and all the rest of it, but how, you know, and I'm being a little bit, you know, £10 a month that would help your cybersecurity with, you know, a 2FA code generator, a password manager, and a VPN. You know, those are the kinds of things that we've got to market to the public. So I think actually that is a critical cost to me, because it will help me out there in the wild west of the interweb, and all that data that's being sucked out anyway. That might give me an opportunity to make myself reasonably safe, and hopefully start to manage some of this future stuff. Well, I've just scratched on the surface, but yeah, the public haven't got a clue. They haven't, bless them, they haven't.
Yeah, well, that's, I think, in part because it's hidden from them in tomes of T's and C's, which are almost impossible for any. I mean, I don't read them. Does anybody read T's and C's?
Page 792, subsection B, paragraph 4. Yeah, of course I do, on a daily basis. I mean, I mean, as I say, that, you know, again, I'm not going to get into presentation mode, but I've been a cop for 25 years and have propped up some, I mean, this is an ego trip for me, but propped up some really gnarly stuff within law enforcement, dealt with lots of significant major conventional criminality, thought I'd been around the block, got into cybercrime, and yeah, my passwords were my dog's name and 123. You know, all of those real tragic cyber behaviors, and yet I thought I was a little bit streetwise. Not a clue. And I've been on a heck of a journey in the last 5, 6, 7 years. But the public are back to me then, and that's where that, you know, every time we present to people that have had no background in this or no awareness training in this whatsoever, it is their dog's name and 123 and all the stuff that comes with it. That's where the public are, and this is going to be a massive leap, because they don't trust data even if they know about it and all the rest of it. So, yeah.